So I'm guessing that a few of you may have noticed the title of my sermon, which is The African Queen, and thought, oh, goody, we're going to get a classical movie starring Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn instead of a sermon this morning. Sorry, it's a lesson for life, same as every Sunday. But fun trivia factoid about the movie The African Queen. In the original book by C.S. Forester, the character that's played by Humphrey Bogart was an Englishman with a thick Cockney accent. But Bogey couldn't manage a credible Cockney accent, so in the film they made him a Canadian. And that is the Canadian content for this lesson. But enough about that, because I'm not talking about that African queen. I'm talking about a real African queen, the Queen of Sheba. And I thought for this last Sunday of Black History Month, we could look at a little biblical Black history. Now, I thought I had learned about the Queen of Sheba back in Sunday school. Turns out the Baptist Sunday school failed me in several respects on this subject. For one thing, there really isn't much written in the Bible about the Queen of Sheba, just that one passage that was read for us from the Book of the Kings and one nearly identical one in the Book of Chronicles. Sheba itself, the land, is referred to a bunch of times in the Bible, generally as a place of great wealth and great beauty and great natural resources, things like gold and jewels and spices, which were incredibly valuable. And the passage from Kings that we just heard tells how the Queen of Sheba, a real African queen, traveled from Sheba to Israel to talk to King Solomon. So often in the Bible, women are not named, and this passage is unfortunately no exception. Solomon is named, but the Queen of Sheba is not. However, tradition steps in where written accounts fail us, and we're fairly sure that the Queen of Sheba's name was Makeda, so that's what we'll call her. It's not totally clear where Sheba was in ancient times, but one theory is that it was ancient Ethiopia. So Makeda traveled from Ethiopia to Israel. And I checked on Google Maps. Google Maps is great. It's about 4,000 kilometers and would take about 6 weeks walking. And it says she made this trip because even 4,000 kilometers away, she'd heard of King Solomon and his reported wisdom. And it says that she had some questions for him. Strangely, though, the Bible does not report what those questions were. And this, I think, is where the good folks in the Baptist Sunday school did something strange. They told me some extra biblical stories about Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And they told me that one of the questions the Queen of Sheba posed to Solomon was that she had some beautiful artificial flowers made. And these flowers were so beautiful and so realistic that no one could tell the difference between them and the real thing. And so the story goes, Makeda challenged Solomon to say which of the flowers were real. So Solomon looked them over from every angle and he couldn't tell. So he just sat down and waited. And eventually a bee flew into the palace and went right past the beautiful artificial flowers and directly to the real ones. Because you can confuse even the wisest of kings with pretty fake flowers, but you can't fool a bee. And this story, while very charming, isn't actually in the Bible. So I'm kind of perplexed as to how my Baptist antecedents even knew of it, let alone taught it to me. And it turns out all the really good stories about the Queen of Sheba are not in the Bible. Most of them, or many of them, are in the Talmud, which is a collection of Jewish writings about the biblical text, interpreting them and making them a guide for ordinary life, dating from around 500 BCE. And the Talmud contains a lot of traditional stories around Solomon and Makeda. And I've actually had a lot of fun in the past couple of weeks reading all these legends, not just from the Talmud, but also from ancient Ethiopian writings. And as a side note, a lot of those stories have to do with questions, as you might imagine, about Jewish culture, but also questions about gender and about women. And the folks in the Baptist Sunday school utterly failed to mention all of those stories. For instance, in one of the tales, Makeda brings Solomon two absolutely identical children. They look the same, they're the same height, they're dressed the same, and she challenges him to tell her which is the boy and which is the girl. And the biblical account, which doesn't include any of these much more interesting stories and details, simply concludes that Solomon, in his supposed great wisdom, was able to answer all of Makeda's questions. But my sermon today is not about the supposed great wisdom of Solomon. It's about the wisdom of the Queen of Sheba. Because whoever this woman was, it was clear that she was powerful and wealthy and wise. Tradition also has it that Makeda went back to Sheba and took with her the Jewish faith that she'd learned of in Israel. And indeed, to this very day, there are Jewish people in Ethiopia whose origins are said to stem from the time of Makeda. And one legend also says that Makeda was so wise and pure and powerful that she was able to take the Ark of the Covenant from Solomon and carry it back to Ethiopia, where it is said to reside to this day, and not wherever Indiana Jones supposedly found it. And interestingly, the Jews of Ethiopia practice a form of Judaism that's distinct from and appears to predate Rabbinic Judaism, so it seems to be very, very ancient. Who knows what the actual history is, but it's all pretty plausible. And it all stems from that road trip Makeda took. So I think we could profitably look at the wisdom of the Queen of Sheba, the African queen. And yet, all we're left with in the biblical account is the assumed wisdom of Solomon, because there are a couple of things at play here, and I'm just going to name them: racism and misogyny. And one of the many horrible things about racism and misogyny are that they privilege wisdom that comes from powerful white men and utterly discount wisdom that comes from women and people of color. And Makeda is a twofer, both female and African, which in my mind kind of explains why we know so little about her. But even with what little we know of her, we can't escape her importance. And I think a deeper dive into this story kind of deconstructs the conventional narrative that Solomon is the fount of wisdom and Makeda is perceived as simply the recipient, because she is not just an appendage to Solomon. She had the wisdom to pursue more knowledge. And as powerful as she was, she had the insight to understand that there was always room to grow in wisdom and leadership. The Queen of Sheba may actually be one of the most famous women in literary history, having been depicted for over 2,500 years in three great world traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I think she shows us what is the beginning of wisdom, and it's questioning. She had a deep desire to know things, a deep curiosity, and a profound openness to learning from many sources. And those are some of the most important tools in becoming wise. In the book of Kings, God is said to have come to Solomon in a dream, and he was able to ask for what he most wanted. And he didn't choose wealth or power, he asked for wisdom. And it seems to me that Makeda, too, was a seeker after wisdom. It doesn't say that God came to her in a dream, though, but it doesn't not say it either. And sadly, God has never come to me in a dream and asked me what I wanted. And it's probably just as well, because I'm not sure I would have had sufficient wisdom to ask for wisdom. But whether we know to ask for it or not, I think wisdom is something that we all seek at some time or another. And I think Makeda can be a guide for us. The things that she did to acquire wisdom are all things we can do too. And we probably don't even have to hike 4,000 kilometers to do it. First of all, wherever we are, we can always try new things. We may learn something along the way. Sometimes we learn what to do. Sometimes when we try new things, we learn what not to do. But we learn and hopefully survive the lesson. Second, we can talk to people we don't know. Makeda didn't know Solomon, but she'd heard of him. And we can seek out people we know or suspect to be wise. And we can talk to people from different backgrounds with different perspectives from ours and pay attention to what we can learn from them. Now, the internet is both a hugely important tool and also possibly the bane of our existence. But it gives us an incredible opportunity to access a wealth of information from all over. Someone has said that if a time traveler appeared today from 100 years ago, the hardest thing to explain to them would be that we carry in our pockets a device that can open to us the entire sum of human knowledge, and we use it to get in fights with strangers and look at pictures of cats. We can use it for better things. Third, sometimes we need to do things the hard way. The easy way doesn't always give us wisdom. Sometimes there are questions that Google can't answer. Makeda did things the hard way, and it can't have been easy to trek from Ethiopia to Israel, but it was worth it in the end. And I think anytime we take the trouble to seek wisdom, it's worth the trek, but it's going to take courage and strength and perseverance. Fourth, the path to wisdom is littered with mistakes. And I don't know quite how to relate that to Makeda, but I can certainly relate it to my own journeys. Who knows, she may have taken a few wrong turns on her journey to Jerusalem to seek wisdom. And God knows I have. I've made mistakes, and sometimes I've learned from them, and sometimes I've had to make them over and over and over again. I'm pretty sure I'll make some more as I continue to seek wisdom over and over. I've always said experience is the best teacher, and the tuition is less if we can learn from other people's mistakes. I prefer the do-it-yourself approach, but experience makes us wiser in the end, I hope. And finally, share your wisdom with others. You all have wisdom of your own. We all have something to give to one another in our shared humanity, drawn from our own journeys, our own experiences, even our own mistakes. And Makeda carried her wisdom and her faith back to Ethiopia, and it resides there today, shared by a community. And we too bring all of our wisdom to our community and share our experience, strength, and hope. God has blessed each of us with gifts to share, and most of all, love to share. And that is the beginning of wisdom.